Today, let's talk about blueprints in Home Assistant. So what is a blueprint? Well, according to the Home Assistant documentation, a blueprint's an automation configuration in which certain parts are marked as configurable. So what that means is you would create a blueprint and have things like your switches, your lights, your motion sensors, any of your entities be able to be selectable within that blueprint. So for example, you can create an automation that is based on a motion sensor. You can turn on the motion sensor or select the motion sensor that's the trigger, and then you can choose the light switch or whatever that's going to be the device. You can reuse that over and over again, choosing different motion sensors or different lights to do different actions. So it's essentially a reusable template. So how do you build one of these? Well, the first thing you need to do is you need to make sure that you have a working automation. So let's go ahead and create an automation. So let's go to Automations. So we'll navigate to Automations and we'll create a new automation. And I'm going to start with an empty one and call this Turn on Playroom Light when Door Opened. And we'll leave all this the same. The device trigger is going to be a state, and it's going to be the front garage door entry door. And we're going to go from off to on. And in our actions, we're going to call a service. So call service. The service is going to be switch turn on, and our entity is going to be Playroom Light. And we can save that. Now, if you go back over to your automations, you will see that you have turn on Playroom Light when doors open. All right, so now we need to get into Visual Studio Code, and we need to come over here onto our directory under config and find your automations.yaml file. And what you'll see at the bottom of the file typically is you'll see the new automation that you just created. And that's going to be turn on Playroom Light when door open. Our trigger is our state, platform state, binary sensor front garage door entry, from off to on, switch turn on Playroom Light, like we just built our automation. So when you built the automation in the UI, this is basically what it comes down to. All right, so now we have an automation, but now we need to put it into a special location. And for that, you need to come over to your configuration directory. And under that is a directory called Blueprints. And under that directory can be any number of different directories. So we're going to create one. I'm going to create a new folder. And that new folder is going to be called Demo. And in this folder, I need a new file. So, and I'm doing this all in Visual Studio Code, which you can either do through the add-on or you can do directly like I'm doing. I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to name this file something that I can reuse later on, know what it is. So light on when door open.yaml. Make it a YAML file. So now we have a blank YAML file. So there's a couple of prerequisites that you must do in this file. The first is, and let me make it bigger for everyone to see, you must have a blueprint section. And under that blueprint section, you need a name. So turn on light tutorial, or just turn on light door open, I'm going to call that. Open. And then for the description is optional, but I'm going to put a little description in here. Tutorial on blueprints. And then domain is automation, because we're going to use this as an automation. All right, now you have a blueprint file. Obviously, this does nothing for you other than just creates a blank blueprint file. So now what we need to do is we need to define some inputs. And the inputs are what you're going to be able to choose from whenever you're in the, building this automation through the UI. And when you're using the blueprint file is really what I mean to say. All right, so now that you have this just very basic part of the blueprint file, you need to start creating the inputs that you're going to be able to select from. So we'll call this section input, and I'm going to give it a descriptive name. So door, this is what we'll use farther down in the action section. And we may need to tweak this a little bit based on the way we built our automation. All right, so now we have door, and I'm going to give it a name. So remember, this is all in YAML, so you need to make sure that you build this out in YAML with the correct spacing and indentations and whatnot. So 2 spaces, name, and then entry door is what I'm going to call that. So if an entry door is open, then it's going to do an action. And for this, I need to be able to select the door. And when you see this all complete, you'll understand it. But we need to have a selector for the door or the binary sensor. And it's really the binary sensor because that door is a binary sensor. We're going to use a selector called binary sensor. So selector and then entity, again, watch your spacing. And then anything in the binary sensor domain. So I'm going to specify the domain as binary sensor. Home Assistant has a whole bunch of different domains. Each type of item is categorized into a domain. And so all my binary sensors, that's all my door sensors, my window sensors, my on-off sensors, anything that is a binary 1 and 0 on-off sensor is in the domain binary sensor. All right, so what I do want to do though is I want to narrow the list down from the selection. Since our blueprint is dealing with doors opened, I can't specify specifically a door under the device class, but what I can do is specify something that determines that it's open or closed or an opening. So I'm going to call another filter called device class, and this is going to be called opening. So that will considerably lessen the amount of items I get to choose from in this template. Otherwise, every single one of my binary sensors will be selectable. All right, so now we have the door as a binary sensor. Now we want to be able to select which item we want to have the action apply to. So for that, we need a target switch, or well, I'm going to call it target switch. So this will be under the same level as the door. So target switch. You can call this whatever you want. This will apply again down below in the action section when we get there. So target switch, and I'm going to name it. And I want this to be lights. Again, the way we're going to do this is a switch domain. So anything that has a switch on it can be selectable. I'm just going to call it lights for now, or light. And then the description, you can use descriptions here. They're optional. If you want to tell somebody what they're trying to select from in the automation or in the blueprint, then this is helpful for them. So let's say the light or lights you want to turn on, because you can select more than one. The lights, that will be turned on. Okay. And then now we go into our selector section for this. This is a different type of selector. We're going to use the target selector in this case. The target selector is a special type of selector. It allows you to choose targeted entities, devices, or areas for these service calls. So you can use, like I said, areas, you can do entities or devices and choose any combination of those to action against this. So we're going to use target as our selector. Again, paying attention to our indentation, our entity, and then our domain. And our domain is going to be switch again. Now, there you can choose light and you can choose switch. You can choose whatever your target item is going to be your action on. If you open a door, your target could potentially be like a siren or something that goes off. I'm going to use switch because most of my lights are showing up in the switch domain in Home Assistant, not the light domain. It's not a specific light, but just rather a switch that controls a light. So we're going to use switch in this case. All right, so we have our input. This input here is going to determine the state, or we're going to watch for a state change here. And this is what we're going to use to select the device or entity or area that's going to be actioned against. So now what we need to do, and this is a very simple one, you can get more complex if you want to. Now we need to come back over here to the top level. These are inputs, obviously. Now we're going to do something for the trigger section. And for the trigger section, we're going to do a platform, and this is where we look at our automation. So let's go back to our automation file, and let's look at how this is set up in our automations file. Down at the very bottom here, we can go ahead, and I'm just going to copy this in right now, and then we'll do some work to modify it a little bit. So copy, Control C. I'm going to bring this over to this section right here. So by copying this over from the other file, this is essentially what we're going to be doing whenever these entities satisfy the criteria. So instead of entity ID here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to what we created above as our input. So we call it door. So instead of saying that whole thing, we're going to say the word input and then door. Door is going to allow us to choose something from the binary sensor domain with a device class of opening. And so this has to be satisfied. We didn't supply any conditions here. Now we want to have a service to turn on a switch. And again, we don't want to turn on a specific switch because that defeats the purpose of reusable blueprints. So what we want to do in this case is we want to create an input, and we're going to use the name target switch up here instead of, make sure there's a colon there, you'll have an error, target switch instead of just an entity hard-coded. So we'll say target switch. So any switch in here that we turn on or select in here will be turned on. All right, so now that you have all of this in here, I'm going to Control S to save it. And what you have to do after you do that is you have to go back over to your Home Assistant and you have to reload the automations. And we're going to check config first, and then I'm going to reload the automations. You don't have to restart all of Home Assistant, you just have to restart the automations. And if I go back over to now my automation section, my blueprint section, if there are no errors in my file, it should be fine. But now we do see we have an error, failed to load blueprint while parsing a block. So let's look and see what the error is. So line 23, column 3, expected block in, but found a question mark. So let's go to line 23, column 3 and see what the problem is. Yep, so what I suspected here is you still need to do a little bit of work when you bring the automation over. I'm going to bring this all back over without the dash, and I'm going to remove conditions since there's nothing in it anyway. If you had conditions, you would want to leave that there. And I'm going to leave action there, but I'm going to bring this over here as well. Make sure these are all on the same line. Now data I can get rid of as well. I don't need that. So now you have a trigger, platform state, change from off to on from this entity here. And you have an action that will turn on this light from this whatever you select from the target switch. So now we'll save it again and we'll reload the automation and see if that fixes the problem. So back over to reload automations, which it just did. That's cool. So I hit the C key on my keyboard and I have all these options for commands. So I just reloaded the automation without having to go back over to the other file. Now let me refresh this page and see if the error goes away. All right, so it says missing input definition for door target switch. So we don't see anything called door and we don't see anything called target switch here for some reason. So let me just come up here and make sure that I have these in the right place. All right, so here you can see already the indentation problem I have. So if I come over here and I highlight all that and I hit Control and right bracket, it's going to move everything over underneath where it's supposed to be, hopefully. So now everything should be, and we'll bring these back over. If I can quit highlighting that. Bring these back over to the beginning line. So let's save it again. Reload automations. Refresh. And now that our YAML is all correctly formatted, meaning we have our blueprint here, then our trigger and our action. So all this blueprint stuff over here is our metadata part of it. So it's under the same level, and then trigger and action are on their own level down below farther in the file. So just keep that in mind. So if everything worked right and we have all our selectors in place, now we should be able to go over to this turn on lights when doors opened blueprint, create an automation from that, and we should have selectors. So I'm going to rename this to test light turn on, just so I can see it. Just like that. And then turn lights on when doors open. You could select a different blueprint if you wanted to use one here. And then turn on lights, the entry door. Now you can see when I limited it to binary sensor and also the type device class was opening, all of these obviously can be open. So we have back door, front door, kitchen, dining, anything like that. So I'm going to choose the front door entry. And then for my lights, I can either pick an area to turn all the lights in the area on, pick a device, or pick an entity. And today I'm going to pick an entity. And of course we see all of our switches because we use the domain switch. And I'm going to look for playroom light. And so there's my playroom. I could do this on multiple devices. If I wanted to turn on another light, like say kitchen counter. Now, anytime this automation fires, we'll have playroom and kitchen counter. Now, once you do all of this, you save it. And if we go back to automations, we should see that created here. So here's test light turn on. So now when the door is opened, the lights will turn on as we said. Okay, so now that you've created the blueprint, what do you do with it? Well, you can keep it internal under your blueprints here to use for yourself, or you can share it out to the public. And there's a couple of ways to do that. One of the ways to do that is to use GitHub gists, however you want to say that. And you can put it over here in a GitHub gist. So the way that works is I would say turn on light demo is what I'm going to call it, just so I know what it is. Then we have to have a file name. I'm going to say turn on light, L-I-G-H-T, demo, and it has to have the YAML extension. And now we need to take this code right here that we just created, copy it, and we'll paste it into the gist here, just like that. And then we want to create a public gist. So click the down arrow, make it public, and then click on this. And you'll see that you get this right here as a URL. So there are two other ways. There's another way you can use blueprints. So you can either discover more blueprints, and this takes you to the community site. It has a blueprints exchange where you can get all of these blueprints. So let's say wake up light alarm with sunrise effect. So somebody built this as a blueprint code. And see how advanced and involved it can be. An example of this, by the way, is the reason why blueprints are nice. You can do all of this one time without having to rebuild it every time you want to use it. Anyway, if you wanted to use this particular, you would copy the URL. So let me just show you mine first. But you can go through here and you can look at all of the community exchange stuff that have been provided by the community. So in my case, I created this gist, and I'm going to come over here and I'm going to import the blueprint. And I'm going to put in the URL of the gist that I just created. And the first thing I'm going to do is preview it. And this is what it's called. This is where the metadata at the top of the file is important. So all of this stuff up top here is what's going to be pulled back into this preview. So blueprint name is turn on a light, door opened, a little description. And then you can look at the blueprint content here by clicking the down arrow and kind of look through here and see if this is something you want to import. If it is, then you would click import blueprint. And now what it's done is it's duplicated it for me, but it's put it in a different spot, right? So it's put under my directory in Home Assistant. So if I look over here in Visual Studio Code, there should be a directory called Mostlychris. If I can find it here, let's refresh. And so under blueprints, there is this one, and I imported it. So anytime you import somebody's blueprint, it's going to create a directory in Home Assistant. So that's how I imported mine. So if you're not comfortable sharing it on the community exchange and you just want to share it out to a few friends just to get their opinion before you put it on the exchange, then you can do it that way. If you want to pull in another one, and we'll just pick one here. Let's do the one I was looking at here, the sun deal. Let me find it. And it looks like somebody did a door sensor turn on off light. So you may not have to reinvent the wheel. Some of this stuff may already be there. So here's the sunrise effect. And this was made by, who posted this one? SBYX. So if I click on this URL, Control C, and I come over here and I import this one and put the URL in here, preview the blueprint. Now we have the name, a description, and then let's look at the content. Here's the whole blueprint. And then I can import the blueprint. Now, what if I want to use this blueprint? All I have to do is create an automation. And there's a whole bunch of stuff you can do. So the wake up light entity, the alarm timestamp sensor, manual alarm time sunrise. So you get the point what you can do with blueprints. You can build these extravagant automations with selectable inputs and outputs, and then reuse them over and over again, share them with the community, use community provided blueprints, store them on GIST, store them on the community blueprint exchange, and do all kinds of neat things with this so you don't have to reuse code over and over again under the same automations. Plus, if someone's already done the work for you, you can import that blueprint, apply your entities and your devices to it, and be able to use it. The blueprint I showed you was super simple and maybe not necessary for what we're doing for automations. It was just an example. You can get as complicated as you want to get with these blueprints. So just a couple more points here. Here's a blueprint tutorial, and I'll link this down below as well. And it talks about how you go through all the steps that I did to create a blueprint. And then you can go through here and get a little more detailed about the schema, which is all the stuff you use to build the blueprint, and you can put it in the blueprint file. I hope you found this video helpful. And if you have any questions or comments, put those down below in the comment section. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit that like button if you liked the video, and we will see you on the next one.